We are live. Hello, YouTube. I'm Christopher Robert Stum, and these are my co-hosts, Duncan and Jordan. Welcome, guys.
What's up, man?
So today we're going to start unpacking personhood. And, I did a lot of talking in the previous podcast, so I want to kind of let you guys unpack that a little bit more today. For those of you just joining us or unfamiliar with the channel, this is a series of live interactive discussions. They're interactive in that we like to, discuss in the live chat with our audience and potentially bring people on with substantive points and have a discourse with them. We usually air every Friday, approximately 7 o'clock Eastern time, but that's tentative. It may be adjusted according to the analytics and statistics we gather as to people's preferences and their availability, etc. So you guys ready to start diving in?
Absolutely.
I think so.
Absolutely. Okay.
Very good. Starting off, sir.
And Critical Cripple starts it off pretty strong. Woof.
Woof. Meow.
Like
Critical Cripple. Meow.
Yeah.
with Jordan with meow. Okay, so Matthew Welch, welcome aboard, Matthew. Happy to have you. If either of you guys, not literally at any time to you, because that would be fallacious, because there'd be a prior time to this video if time fundamentally exists, but during an applicable time, for a t in the interval of dt, that is the interval of time for this video, if you would like to participate, click this link and we can pull you up. You don't have to necessarily show up on the video. You could even be a person just talking through an audio, and you can just turn off the video component on your camera if it pleases you. Hello, Junius. Thanks for stopping by. Glad to see you following. These conversations, I conjecture, are more interesting if and when there are more people to produce a bevy of ideas.
That's great. I would love some interaction from guests as well. I mean, we can talk a lot among ourselves and look like idiots, but it's nice to have other people look like idiots with us.
Totally.
I'm not sure.
And I think sometimes they throw things out of left field that we hadn't thought of before as well, because it's an interesting angle. So sometimes spurs on more conversation than we intended, which sometimes makes our videos long, but that's okay.
All right, so on track of personhood, let's get straight into it. I think we should start to differentiate sort of maybe literal definitions versus functional definitions, because
agreed. Well, first, so rather than in our definition, let us make this concession. Our attempt is not to define in totality what a person is. That just seems rather.
It's not going to help us get anywhere in this conversation.
Andrew.
What the experience of personhood is for most people. We have to go very functionally. So I'm afraid that, Christopher, this is not going to bode well with the fundamental logic and mathematics of things.
Right. Well, that's okay. That's okay. So how about this? We let us relinquish those standards, right, and reduce them to a concession of looking for a subset of necessary or sufficient conditions.
Yes.
Of what personhood may or may not be.
And
all right, so
I'm gonna to have that happen.
Here we go. A good question already.
Looking at things. I'll let you get into the second. Actually, no, take that, and I'll think about my point of it.
I've got a couple of thoughts, but why don't you guys go ahead and parse it first?
Okay. Well, I was lazy, and I didn't actually look up the legal definition today of personhood, but I have seen it in text before. But it is a very unusual term that people. It's kind of nebulous. I looked up the diction definition, and that did not help at all.
So here's what I
like dictionaries, but today they let me down.
I conjecture that suppose there was a definition, right?
Yeah.
In legislature of what constituted a person.
Yep.
If that definition, whatever it was, right, let us say had some degree of applicability, would we say that definition being present in the law resolved potential existential quandary of whether the thing that we define is what a person would be?
Yeah, it's not at all. It's never going to be, I think, to be functional because,
welcome aboard, Matthew. We got someone from chat. Nice to see you.
Welcome in. So yeah, back to your point, Christopher. I think it's never going to be absolute in the sense it's going to be functional. I mean, the definition of personhood that we have now very much rests on kind of an assumption of free will and autonomy that's not necessarily obvious. It's a little nebulous in how it's defined. It's sort of like well, if you did this and you like mens rea, like the intent, it's kind of like you intended to do it versus you didn't, versus insanity versus there's degrees to which you have some sense of autonomy and personhood that's built into our legal framework. So
what is the no to? Because I want to be clear. Our point was that if it was the case that we had a legal definition, whatever it was, is that enough to show that we've identified the thing we sought to determine? Okay, so just because I give you a definition in a system of law or even in a book, right, in a dictionary, does that wouldn't it depend on what the definition was? Not that it was in a particular set of rules, right? It's not because it's necessarily in the dictionary.
Well, I argue that the definition of personhood changes over time.
I don't think I can test that necessarily.
I
like one of the things.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think that like as I was thinking about personhood today, I was like, okay, so we have these things that we generally associate with personhood. Some people will associate with personhood, and some people associate, but some of these personhood suggestions sort of like actually apply to other animals and stuff like that. So then we have to actually sort of make it more just about the humans, because if it applies to other animals, then it doesn't really work. You know what I mean?
I don't know, because that's a good question.
Can you guys, are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Able to hear me?
Yep.
Well, I mean, what if we applied this to, let's say, an AI, or how can we make a distinction between us and them and find person?
Okay, so I think he's agreeing with our point.
Yeah.
Okay, he's cutting out a little bit for me. I can't quite hear him very well.
Yeah.
It's very lagging. Yeah, it's quite lagging over here.
I can get bits and pieces, Matthew. Is it possible you could try from a different location, or?
Hold on.
I'd like to answer this critical cripple point very quickly. He said that I'm not sure the gender, but they said the legal definition isn't important to the philosophical. And I understand where they're coming from, but I don't necessarily think that's a good place to start from. I think we should say that it is a part of it, but not necessarily the whole thing in and of itself.
That's right. It's not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. So I think we should definitely. That's a good point, though. I'm glad you brought that up, because that kind of gives us a little more groundwork for what we're talking about this.
Right. It's a messy possible relation whereby in some instances they are relevant, right? For example, maybe in some instances the legal parameters have predictions as to what a person could even be.
Yeah. And so I also want to bring up something I was thinking about this week in relation to this. I think I'm not sure about any of the claims I'm about to make. I'm just kind of spouting off thoughts. Gotcha. So you come at me with whatever you think. It seems to me more like we should get into personhood as some type of odd illusion, in a sense that we are a plethora of motivations coming together in some odd totality that is able to, well, it may be not able to choose between the motivations at certain times, maybe not choose between, and maybe it seems like we're choosing between. I think we have to get somewhere in there where we have an odd situation where we are not like other animals, and that we have a sense of awareness of our motivations to a degree that they do not, whether or not we have autonomy over those motivations or not. I think that goes back to
I don't know if we have that kind of awareness. Only we, perhaps we do. I don't know, but what I do think you're kind of alluding to, and critical cripple makes an interesting point that a baby doesn't either. But so it's kind of like, it's not that autonomy. It's not that you're saying, Jordan, that autonomy is the sole parameter of personhood, right? And so critical cripple, I don't think he's saying that if you don't have these traits, then you're not a person.
No, I'm just getting into the more conscious experience. If we want to expand this into the baby and brain dead and these functional categories as a general thing, then yeah, we can start there. Maybe I'm getting too narrow in what I'm talking about.
So philosophy queen asks Andrew, in what sense is someone who is brain dead a person? Well, what do we mean by brain dead?
That's personhood. Right? That's what we're trying to figure out. Yeah.
Right, they're related, right? And so it's a question on purpose. And Jordan is posing, I believe, a question, right? Not a not a claim of this is personhood.
No idea.
We're trying to find a stone to stand on in the nebulous river.
And Critical Cripple pointed out something nice before, which he was saying, why is it a person at conception, and then why is it a person as it's a baby and not necessarily a person as when it's a clump of cells? That sort of ties into it because, and as Jordan was saying, it's kind of a composite thing. It can't just be one thing. If we made it just like, if it has autonomy, then it's the person. Well, with today's technology that we have today, we're making things like that. I think this is what Matthew was trying to say before.
Oh, yes.
Is that Matthew was trying to get at that we makes things so sufficiently advanced with our AI and our robotics and stuff like that, that we can essentially make a person according to some of the guidelines that we've had in the past for personhood. So that's why, as Jordan was saying, the definition has changed over the years. Because after a while, it's like, oh, hold a sec, I just made a toaster, that's a person. We better change the definition, you know what I mean?
He toasts at will.
So, Jordan, I'd like to ask Matthew what he thinks to the following question.
Yeah.
And then we'll let other people weigh in. Yeah. Can you hear me?
I do apologize. This connection here was coming scrambling a lot, so I didn't first understand like the definition of what you guys came together. What is personhood?
Well, here's the good news. Here's the good news. We don't know. As far as we're aware. Okay, even that we don't know.
We didn't define what personhood is.
Right.
What was the question?
So here's my question. There have been attempts by some philosopher to narrow down subsets of parameters that we may associate with either sufficient or necessary conditions for personhood. So, for example, John Locke conjectured that personhood was an instantiation in a system of consciousness persistent through accrued memories that were kind of like defined as a primitive recursion function, meaning your memories could be traced back to a sufficient point in time, right? But then what do we mean by the continuity of these accrued memories insofar as they relate to consciousness? What does that mean? What do you think about that attempt?
Must have some form of like consciousness. Is that what I'm trying to
he didn't really define it very robustly. And I think the philosophers that spoke about consciousness were purposely vague, not because they were stupid, but because they wanted to leave enough room for future thinkers to concretize the idea. Yeah. Okay. So when he was saying that whatever this thing is, he thought that, and notice he didn't define very carefully what memory means, right? But there was a subset of memory associated with consciousness that across time defined personhood, which wasn't necessarily, for Locke, tied to a body.
Oh, okay.
And now I have qualms with this definition, and we can, as we often have done in the past, we can get more rigorous as the conversation progresses and unpack them. But at first, like you guys to play with the ideas and to interact with chat and see what people think. Yep. So do you guys see any potential problems with this definition?
Yeah, I think I do with what I was saying before, with the technology that we make, we can end up doing things that do these sorts of things. You know what I mean? Like
consciousness?
Is it possible to have a computer that has well, that's the thing, it's very nebulous. Like the future technology, what that will be is very hard to predict. Unless you're a very good
here's my question. Writer. Would it be a problem if you could write software that eventually constituted a person? Would that be a problem?
I don't know, but if it's not a problem, then it means that it becomes a person. And I'm fine with that. If the computer's sufficiently smart to become a person, well,
I don't know if just intelligence is a requisite.
Yep. But I mean, like when I say intelligent, I don't mean like necessarily super smart, but I mean like being able to hold memories. And
guys, hold on. Like, what is consciousness?
I'm going to find you one day, Critical Crew. I'm going to hunt you down. And we're going to have.
We need to be careful. We need to be careful here, though. Nobody, as far as I'm aware, has said a dog is not yet a person. But maybe you're asking the question. But maybe you're asking the question to ask: is a dog not a person?
I think the question is, to what degree is a dog a person?
Right. It may to what degree would still imply membership, right?
Yeah. To what degree is
because he was saying because as I was saying before, like there's so many composite parts to it so that there are going to be things that are going to tick some of the boxes. Like if we make it the definition proper enough to contain humans, then there's still going to be like technology that currently exists that fills 25% of that quota, or some animals might fill 30% of that quota. You know what I mean?
Let me make a conjecture I'm not sure about here.
Sure.
I believe that our definition of personhood at our most abstract levels that we can think as humans rests on a few sort of mythological assumptions that we're sort of acting out.
Yeah.
Aren't necessarily true as much as they are functional. And so this is informing a lot in how we think of personhood as, well, I guess Westerners, but also modern humans. Because I think a lot of personhood comes from, this is very abstract, a lot of our conceptualizations of personhood comes from mythological ideas of where autonomy lies with, or I guess kind of where power lies in like a deistic way. So if you look at societies kind of across time, power lies like kind of from a top down. Like there's a god or there's an emperor, and there's the people, and it's like, you know, the emperor is above the law. He can do whatever he wants. So it's kind of like the degree to which he is it's not really that he's more of a person than other people. He just has more of a degree of kind of, I don't know. I guess let me say this. We are in a state now where that's not how we live with that power structure. We kind of think that everybody is equal under the law, under God. So it's kind of an odd place to be, because before it was like more top down, and now kind of the Judeo-Christian value system has shifted us into this odd individualistic type of way of living. And so you see that kind of in new religions where it's like, we are God. They're like taking it even further, going from God to we're going to become God.
So here's my question then.
Yeah,
Insofar as this, like all of this could tie into Locke's definition of personhood.
Yeah.
Are you, if you don't remember, being raised by your mother, not the person born to her? Do you not have a mother?
If you don't remember it all.
No, in other words, if you refers to the person, and this is a question, this is not a conjecture. I want that to be clear. I think this. I'm asking, per his definition, does this potentially pose a problem?
This is the functional versus the logical here. This is the classic issue we're running into.
Well, like I was just thinking before, when we were talking about the people's, like the definition of personhood, and he said that it comes from, like, not comes from, but it has connections to religious mythical things, and some assumptions that are made on that point. For example, like the difference between a human and an animal is, but is it like, are we all animals? So
yes,
are we going down the wrong path with that in a way? You know what I mean? By trying to,
Well, no, I mean,
Andrew? No.
humanity, I mean, as an entirely, like to make a distinction that we're special, that we're highly evolved, that we are no longer, in a sense, that type of animal, even though we are animals. You know, we're just fully evolved. Well, not fully evolved, but we're evolved to be, and I don't want to say more complex, because there are species that are actually intricately more complex than us.
Way more. Not that we've got jet engines, octopus. Yep.
Right.
And
but
Andrew
I'm trying to get an
raises
understanding of where Christopher was going, that Locke's, like trying to get a basic understanding of Locke's definition was that personhood was founded on our memory, like the memories that we have gained over time. And that's what he was trying to make a broad, like, if that's what his definition is, it's kind of, I mean, you can kind of break that argument down, considering that what about apes or dogs? Same trait that can.
Well, allow me to hone in on this a little more, if I may. I think it's sort of tempting to, in a sort of a irrational way, not think of us as any different than animals. But the one thing that makes us different than animals is that we're having this discussion
Yeah, that we've labeled everything.
Because what we do
Sure,
is
dolphins can have
so much different
discussions,
than
you know?
animals. What we
can
do
have
is
discussions,
bargain
like
with
in-
the potential.
And by animals, you mean non-human animals.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah.
And
Okay.
when you say that, you're saying that you're not aware of other animals having conversations of this sort.
That's the thing, because they could actually be talking science to each other under the ocean for all we know.
I don't
but,
know.
you
I
No,
don't
they
know.
do. They do. I believe.
That's-
Like dolphins, sonars, they communicate through sonars. Now, we don't know
Yeah.
exactly what they're communicating or how complex their communication is, but we understand that there's a form of communication. And that it's in itself is more complex, you know, in a
Exactly
sense,
right.
sonar. I mean, now we know that it's hard to say what communication is because, I mean, can communicate within its environment through like reproduction or pollinating, and then we have communication through verbiage, us, like what you and I are doing right now,
Yeah.
to that extent. So we have to understand like what do we mean by communication also.
Well, that's a higher degree of communication that we have because we conceptualize things in a much more abstract way, and we're able to. It's almost like be aware of our communication while simultaneously communicating, which is not how plankton interact with their environment. They just communicate in like a one-to-one way. They don't have awareness of future outcomes or past events. You know, we're synthesizing information based on time that we're aware of, you know?
Well, I mean, I
That's-
don't necessarily want to say
true
that we
for
understand
plankton.
what's
That's
to come, you know?
probably true for plankton.
Maybe we
But we
could
see
predict.
orcas like playing with seals to teach their youth to be able to hunt the seals properly. So they're communicating ideas to their youngsters to make them progress as a system. That's pretty close to what we're trying to achieve with language. You know what I mean?
But it's instinctual. It's not a I don't want to say conscious because I'm not sure that we're conscious, but to us, we have an illusion.
Yeah.
We at least have some illusion of consciousness we have to deal with at some level. I mean, it's instinctual that a beaver builds a dam. You could say the beavers are communicating to build dams with other beavers, but what they're doing is not consciously saying, "Oh, guys, we should build a dam." They're just doing it because
Birds have used tools. We often refer to people as being bird brain as being stupid, but it actually turns out birds are quite smart. What they have, they use quite
Very
efficiently. Yes. Yeah. And we've seen them actually use tools. And then we've seen them teach other birds to use tools. So there is definitely there's some sort of level of communication of ideas going on amongst them. How pedantically they've managed to word their words, but they've done it enough to be able to say, hey, look at this, I'm doing this, you do that, and it spreads. Like they actually teach each other stuff. It's weird. Birds are weird, man.
I think you bring up.
Okay, so looking outside of this, like the intricacies of like intelligence, what about defining personhood as establishing laws or rules?
Establishing what? Sorry?
Like laws. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
I have an idea of how we can concretize Locke's proposal, make it a little less nebulous. I've been thinking about this silently, and I think I have a fair portrayal of it. And I'm going to try to screen share to maybe make it a little bit less nebulous. Can you guys see this? Okay. All right. So the idea is, let's say that psi at T naught denotes whatever a person means if it's physically instantiable at or over a time, right? Maybe this should be a period of time, but psi is a person at time T naught. It could even be a sufficiently small interval of time T naught, if you will, right? So let that be a symbolic representation of the instantiation of whatever person is. Hello there. Let that be a physical instantiation of that in a applicable system. We're keeping this purposely nebulous so that we can iron out maybe what this would mean, right? And so associated with such a person psi, let M psi of T naught be the set of all X such that X is a conscious memory of phi for all T. And I'm running out of room, but for all T in an interval, 0 T naught, where T naught is up to the time necessary, and so we've already got implicit in this definition assumptions about continuity of time, right, as some kind of like complete or metrizable space. We don't know. You could adjust the definition to maybe just be a permutation of states of a system, whatever. But I claim maybe what Locke is saying, okay, is given two times, let's say T2, T1 in R positive union 0, so basically a non-negative quantity of time, each of them, such that T2 is greater than T1, okay, given these two times, Locke might be saying that psi at, I'm going to write it this way, so psi at T2 is logically equivalent, that is, this is the quote-unquote same person, psi of T1, so these are the same people, if and only if, okay, M, let me just, psi of T2 is a subset, or let me put it this way, psi T1 is a subset M psi T2. So this is
yeah, I get it.
So the idea is if we take someone, so if we take for some, in pictures, if we take for some entity psi, and we say that this is its memories, right? So M psi of T1 at time T1, this in a later state, the memory has to be the same, the set of memory, or larger. So their memories can grow, and those are logically said to be the equivalent person if they persist across time.
Yep.
I think that's what Locke is trying to say.
Yeah.
That there exists some functional mapping between these sets.
Yeah.
But now here comes a concern that I have.
Well, I agree with what you're
Are there
putting down
levels
in
to
the
it,
meaning of it. Yep.
Go ahead.
Matthew, there are levels. That's what he's pointing out.
Yeah, right. Because but
It's
here's
breaking up over. It's hard to go ahead.
it's maybe you can watch in hindsight, but if you have questions, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is an attempt to concretize a little bit what he means, to make it a little bit less nebulous, right? What we're saying is the set M of psi at time t naught is said to be the set of memories at the time t naught accrued by psi, if psi is a person. So we're assuming that these things are sufficiently well defined that at a time t naught, for all t less than or equal to t naught on the interval 0, t naught inclusive, we claim that this set is a set of accrued memories, conscious memories, whatever that may mean. We're being almost purposely nebulous to allow for flexibility. We're just saying if these things can be defined in this way, this is the initial set, right? And it can either stay the same size or grow, e.g. the set of memories for phi at time t1, a lesser time, or rather an earlier term in the permutation of states, that has to be a subset of the set of memories at a later time or a later term in the permutation of states.
Well,
so in other words, yeah, go ahead. I see a lot of problems, but go ahead.
I get amnesia.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So as soon as you have that this is the initial set, and then suddenly at some time T1, and then later on at time T2, we have that this set is not the same cardinality. In fact, this is a lower cardinality, if you will. Then, as you say, right, you get amnesia. That definition isn't satisfied. We would not have that M psi of T1 we would not have M psi T1 subset of M psi T2 would not be satisfied.
I've got a point I'd like to make. I don't think personhood is necessarily an internal definition as much as it is a collective agreement.
Interesting. Let's get to that.
Because
I want to point out
what we're saying is.
Can you say that again? I just read Juris's comment at the same time. I
what we're
multitasking.
Oh, sorry, Duncan. No, what we're saying is not necessarily that the memories are cognizantly stored within the person across time. It's that the knowledge that that person has had these memories and experience to the group is relevant to his being a person because of his nature of experience similar to that of mine, at which my capacity is at some point to have memories and experiences like this, regardless of if I lose that capacity or not.
True. And even the things that we do are done by things that we like. How I move is dictated by the things I know somewhat. So I don't know a lot about amnesia, but aren't people who get affected by amnesia still retain the ability to speak, walk, and a few other skill sets as well.
There's degrees.
Degrees, right? So I didn't know that's something that's I'd never expected.
Well, here's
we're
what's
sort of
interesting.
talking about,
Go ahead.
since we're sort of talking about like now as a sense of personal identity, let's say that the slate is entirely clean, like mentally, but could we say that DNA wise, that is there a certain personhood in our DNA, like memory? Since we keep on extrapolating memory and correlating with personhood, can we say that in our DNA, what defines us would be memory in our DNA? So let's say that I get amnesia, right? Let's say that I just
I don't know.
am no
Hang
longer on the level.
There might be a fallacy of composition here because if I take your
I
DNA,
see a problem with it.
right?
Yeah,
do I
I'd say that
have
if I
your
cut off my
personhood?
arm and keep it alive, if I cut off my arm and keep it alive, am I two people?
But also, there is variation in a person's genetic material, so people don't realize. Like there's subtle
Oh,
variation.
yeah, that's right. You told me about that.
It's not all uniform.
Yeah.
But what I'm pointing out, okay, is I want to draw attention to a potentially overlooked problem here, though. Okay, now let us also assume this, though. Let us assume that we now have two identical sets for all future times from an initial time. Are these the same person? You see, I claim that by identity of a person, we're not just talking only about the persistence of personhood across time or states of systems, right? We're also asking at any one time, can we distinguish, is there a property of identity to personhood? Well, that looks suggestive. To distinguish these things from each other. Right? I mean, so notice that
moves right there.
But notice that for all times t, if these are identical, right? How, from that definition, can you determine them apart from each other? That is, if they're different instantiations, improbable though it may be, of the same sets of conscious memories, whatever he defines those to be. If it's possible for there to be multiple physical instantiations, then how is there further specificity that we could find, right? And by the way, I don't think anybody here has said a 2-year-old is not a person. In fact, the definition I just showed you wouldn't immediately imply that, if that's what you're asking. It's just that it's just that what I'm pointing out here is a property of identity, at least in a logical sense, can not only determine things from each other, in ordering, but also at any point in a permutation of states. You'd think that would be a property of identity, right? Meaning in this system at this time, these two sets, if that's how we define personhood, are indistinguishable persons. If you have identical conscious memories.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Not identical, sorry, equivalent. They're logically not the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's so that's one way we could attempt, and again, that's not the be all end all of what Locke is saying, but it's a way we could try to concretize a little bit, make it a little bit less nebulous, right? Is he's really implicitly saying we need the subset to persist as the satisfaction of each being a subset of the other across time to establish the continuity of personhood he might be talking about, right? And so maybe the question would be, rather than conscious memory, what set of parameters are necessary for that satisfaction to occur? And is that the form that we would like? Because notice that a weakness to that quote unquote robust attempt is if you look at it, you realize, but wait a minute, where in this definition do I account for the potential complication of multiple instantiations of equivalent phenomenology?
And can we hold this same distinction with other, I guess, animals in a sense, like an elephant or an ape, or distant cousin?
And so Junius asked an interesting question. He's basically, it's sort of like the ship question, right? Only he's kind of asking it insofar as it relates to their DNA and implicitly perhaps person.
Yeah, sci-fi version of the ship. I got it.
But we have to be careful as to not contrive things associated with personhood with the fundamental essence of personhood. I don't know if such a thing is even tenable to say, right? Like,
okay, I believe I have some sort of opinion. This is not correct to my knowledge, but I'm just going to say it, and you guys tell me what you think here. Okay. To Junius's question here, the point at which the ship becomes a ship when you take it piece by piece is when a collective of people agree that it's a ship. Because this is confusing, but the definition of a ship is already a collective agreement. So at what point the ship becomes a new ship is also a collective agreement.
Maybe from one perspective.
I
Right?
mean, the word ship is even a collective agreement when you get down to it, I think.
Well, it's
Like,
seen.
That's what I was saying. Like that's my point, is that these are
Yeah.
collective agreements on what these things are. They're not necessarily intrinsic to anything.
Right.
Yep.
But
I
again,
agree.
them not necessarily being intrinsic doesn't mean that we're the arbiters of what they mean, right? I hear what you're saying. I think, and I think there's it's a potentially substantive point, but I'm not sure if it gives us what we want insofar as a demonstration of the ability for us to verify that it is something of a consensus, right? I don't know. Is there a metaphysical thing that is a ship?
No.
I don't know. Because here's the thing: what if it was also complicated in such a manner that it's not that we determine, but that we are biconditionally related to that thing?
Oh, I see.
Right. So it's not clear. Because I don't know.
That's a great point. That's a really good point.
At least it can be a ship to an ant, I guess, in a way. Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know because, but it is a substantive point in that it's important to ask the question, right?
Yes.
All definitions are collective agreement. That's not necessarily true.
We should get into that.
I wish it was that simple. I wish it was that simple, because then people wouldn't have conflicting definitions.
Well, isn't it that the definitions are in collective agreement and collective argument, and so new definitions emerge as a result of argument?
I could understand how a person like new to philosophy or logic might think that's what a definition is. But I conjecture that if you sit and ruminate on what fundamentally a definition is, you might find it to be more complex than simply an agreement. And that's partly because how has the agreement or consensus been reached? And as soon as you study the body of data pertaining to the statistical correlations, you realize that there's so much variance there that it's not clear what that even means.
Get into that, Christopher.
Can I ask something about that that's related?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, would it be fair to say that the most commonly used definitions are collective agreements? Would that be?
I don't know. I don't know.
I feel that a lot of people in like the science world, like yourself, actually have definitions that you have to make that aren't necessarily collective agreements that you actually use from data or stuff, but in the actual everyday world where most people are just walking around sort of things, be using words and things that generally are known for just being known. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
See, I don't.
You have you have a good point here that I am hung up on because I'm just seeing the functionality of it, and what you said was really interesting to me. So I want you to go deep into this from your perspective.
Okay, so here's the first question I have then. We can kind of motivate us. I don't want us to get too off track of personhood, but this is relevant because it's a definition, right?
Really relevant.
Yeah, right. Well, sorry, I was being hyperbolic. I was trying to apply the definition.
Yeah, understandable.
Yeah, I got you. But so my question is, let's say I give you a definition of a bloog.
Of a what?
A bloog, right?
A bloog, right? Gotcha.
A bloog is a schmoog, right? That's my definition. So let's say we agree that that's the definition, right?
Yeah.
What have we defined?
Nothing except for that there's two things that have the same name.
But so we already have an issue before we get into the formal logic. We have a question of, does the thing fundamentally exist, or have we just referentially constructed a linguistic object, right? A syntactical, and so we might say that it's different, that even in the nature of the existence of what we mean to reference in a definition, right? A definition doesn't even supply.
Yeah, that's when I looked it up on Google before. It basically said a bloog and schnoog. I was like, damn it.
well, here's what I'm asking. Okay, what I'm asking you is, are you like, before we get into the logical consequences of insofar as consensus is involved, right? Meaning, even if we assume we can have a consensus on that definition, which I hope for the sake of argument, we assume that we agree, that those words are whatever they are, right? Is it possible for us in having those words to understand what we sought out to find? Necessarily. I'm not asking you if it's sometimes the case. I'm asking you, does it follow as a logical consequence?
Not necessarily, no.
Right. And so it's not clear what it's a definition of.
But humans don't operate in that world of like
I don't think they do. They don't think they do. Right. But here's my point: is all I did was change the words. But you can Google many definitions that do that kind of stuff. Where they'll say, an X is a Y. And it's difficult to understand whether or not we epistemically found what we sought to find, right?
Yep. I said, like, as a young fellow, when I was going, because I've always looked through dictionaries as a thing to help me, but when I was younger, I remember opening up a dictionary for a rather hard word, looking at it, going, okay, and then opening it up to the next, like, one of the words is a definition, and then looking at that definition and going, I got another word to look up. So it was basically all just running itself around in itself, sort of things.
So this is where we're going to unpack it a little bit more. He says that there are labels given meaning by people. I think this is an oversimplification. I don't know if we can give things meaning, because if we can understand, for example, and prove that uncountably many numbers exist, but we can only have, shall we say, if matter is quantized and thoughts are able to be partitioned into quantized, sets, only if we can't think or even name every number, then in what sense have we given those numbers meaning?
Yeah.
We couldn't if we wanted to. If they're an uncountable set, there's no onto function, right? And so it's tempting, I think, for us to think that we give meaning to things. I don't know, because as we discussed in our prior video pertaining to meaning could possibly be internal or external, and we may not always be able to value something autonomously.
Well, that reminds me of like when you were talking about symbology a year ago. That two is actually a two. It's just what we utilize that to mean. Two could be, like I believe you said, was like cat. It could be cat plus cat
word,
could
right.
equal 4. Or
Right.
Cat plus cat could equal cat.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's a word. And so, but beyond the label, what I'm pointing out is we may not be able to label all things, which means sometimes it is as simple as that. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you actually, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes in formulating a discrete syntax, there may be implications beyond the syntax pertaining to the thing you mean to describe. Like in the case of real numbers, we can't name every real number.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, but
I was just thinking of some person they're counting real numbers for you.
What I'm saying isn't that meaning. Let's be careful and just say this: that meaning is related to those things that have instantiations associated with it, right? There is a relation between us and meaning, perhaps. The nature of that relation, I don't know. I don't know if we are necessarily the arbiters or biconditionally existent with it.
I don't believe we're the arbiters, actually.
Neither do I. I think we're people that impose our meaning on things. Like the universe is a chaotic thing, and these labels that we're sort of mucking around with or whatever, they didn't come attached to the universe. We didn't look up at the sky and it had like a big yellow ball with the word sun written next to it. We had to go, what the hell is that? And then eventually work from there. So these labels are created by imperfect people to describe a very chaotic and complicated universe, and done by people originally who didn't even have very many tools.
Right.
Yeah, so we've inherited a whole bunch of problems because of this.
I mean, these are great questions, Critical Role. I mean, to be honest, you should just come on in and join us in the conversation.
Well,
some
then
people
we
comments.
When we utilize those concepts to define our environment, because back then we didn't know a lot of our environment. We thought that thunderstorms were the wrath of like someone higher. You know, I don't want to impose a specific religion to it, but I'm saying whatever, it was something like of a higher power. And so we use meaning and as a fundamental level, in a sense, to understand our environment. And I'm not talking about like physics and stuff. I'm just saying how to go about living in our environment and understanding it.
Like my question is, like it's a very, I'd have to think for a long time about if the nature of the relation between a definition,
right,
language, and our reference towards things. Do they metaphysically exist independent of reference? Things like that, I don't know. Do they fundamentally?
We still have same like hello. Hello comes in what? I want to say 100 different languages. And
right.
in itself,
and it seems there's something there that the language references.
Right.
Right. But
so there's like an underlying concept to it, but yet so many different labels for it.
Right. And so it's not clear. That doesn't mean in all cases that's how it works. It's not that simple very often. But right. It's a question of, is there a distinction between fundamental existence and something existent just, in lieu of the syntax and structure of language, right? A referential kind of existence, not of anything there, but almost like an empty language, right?
I don't know. Like that.
Neither do I.
This is a place where people who don't know come together.
But this is my point, is before we even dive into the logic, right? What I'm pointing out is even if we could succeed in establishing some basis for consensus statistically, or even if everybody thought this is what this means, how do we know that there's anything there and it's not an empty language?
Well, what if we change from our concepts to, let's say, artificial intelligence that just simply uses binary coding? What about that? That
what do you mean?
Can construct language or concepts in it. We utilize it.
That's correct.
We utilize it basically in our computer softwares.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, like the computers sort of have it a little bit better than us in that regard, because like when we
there are trade-offs. There are trade-offs because you see.
Yeah.
To then say one thing requires a long string of code.
Duncan's always had a dream to be an iPad.
In a regard, and the regard being that they have a more concreted sort of like a zero means a zero, and that's they know that. Whereas with us humans, we go up to say boat or something, and people don't know what boat necessarily means all the time.
I get what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying it's always.
But here's what I'm trying to say. For all we know, this thing is reading for all of this, right? But what does it mean? That's
where our problem lies.
There's information and then there's meaning.
Yes, exactly. I was just talking to a friend 2 days about this. The difference between what I was referring to is data and information, sort of things. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're right. It's more meaning in data. You can get data and then you apply meaning to it or draw meaning from it. But then, if you gave that same data to someone else, they may extrapolate a different meaning from it. The data never changed, the meaning did.
I don't know if it's as simple as we give meaning to language. It may be complicated in a biconditional relation of some sort, whereby sometimes we have data for which we have an instantiation of meaning, whatever that is, but we don't necessarily have meaning in it autonomously.
Yeah, like I agree. Like data is just data. It's not have any philosophy.
Is that what you're referring, like intrinsic? There's no intrinsic.
Not necessarily is what I'm saying. I don't know. But I'm saying it maybe
there is a sense of definition out of those.
I'm trying to say that sometimes, like if you looked at the past video pertaining to meaning and existence, it may better contextualize what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say, okay, is that the existence of meaning, if and when it occurs, may not be as simple as something we autonomously prescribe or instantiate, as much as a biconditional phenomenon, which sometimes there may be autonomy and sometimes there may be no autonomy associated with it.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a very good definition.
We may not always be authoring the meaning, if distinct from data, that occurs biconditionally with data in association with our existence or the existence of applicable entities. That's what I'm trying to say.
I don't believe that we're off.
Yep. And Junius made it my point that I was saying before, but he said it way better than I did. With I conjecture that measurements and calculations via mathematics is a more robust system and get us as close as we can to an answer, rather than language and logic itself. That's what I sort of was saying about computers. They just run on measurements and calculations, sort of.
We have to be very careful here because I study and specialize in mathematics, and it's built on foundational logic. So I don't know what he means by that.
Okay, yeah.
You know,
that's what I mean. I think that's what he's getting at, though.
We like to think of these things as categorically separate, but that's not. You're building mathematics on foundations of axiomatized set theory and propositional logic.
You have to use words to explain mathematics sometimes. So that's
that's not what I mean. Like a word can be I'm not talking about English. I think he means by English. We're trying to be charitable in my interpretation, right? What I'm trying to say is that I don't know how you're able to, it's not that there's never an interception or a disjointness to those sets, but I don't think they're easily separable.
Mm-hmm.
Can definition be changeable?
Of course.
Yeah.
Let us define a thing that is a changeable definition. So let S be a definition that is a definition that is changeable. Is that a definition that is changeable? Can we define a changeable definition?
Define a changeable definition. I mean,
That's
a word that develops new meaning over time.
Even right, you could just
that's
take
what
the
I'm thinking, like, I don't think it means like the properties of the object change. I think it means how we describe it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because some properties could change in a system, right? And we would still say that's wrapped up in the set,
and
the span of possible
exactly right.
things.
That's what I had to think about it.
Right. So what do we mean by change? Do we mean like what is changing? Is it the value of a parameter or the parameters themselves? Right. So it's like
let's say all of it. You know, the meaning of it as an entirety.
Well, that's what I was sort of getting at before with computers, right? The computers always have the same meaning. If I hit Alt F4 on a computer, and it's the same computer everywhere else, it will give me the same trigger. Whereas if I say the word All Blacks to Kiwis, that gives us a different trigger to what would give to an Australian. You know what I mean?
So this is fair. And by the way, Junius, I hope we didn't strawman you. We're not saying that you like. It's just that sometimes it can, but sometimes doing actual mathematics will also lead you to like a conclusion that conjecture can't apply. Like I claim if you take a set and you start with basic axiomatized set theory, and you let S be the set of all things that mathematics can bring us closer to, you can use Cantor's theorem to then contradict that and produce a power set. And now there exists at least one Y that by our definition, if it's sufficiently well-defined, right, that's not applicable to. And that's if we
axiomatized art using mathematics.
Right. So it's like what I'm trying to say is if there's no set of all sets, it's going to be hard for us to classify everything belonging to one thing and thinking of everything that way, you know? So it's like, it's not that I'm disagreeing with you, but I'm just resisting the urge to delude myself into reducing a multivariable system into a pseudo unidimensional analysis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just as a second convenience. Yeah, I get you.
You know, and so it's but back to personhood.
That should also be a motto as well. I don't know. And back to the topic.
But I do conjecture this is unfolding beautifully, and as I had hoped that we have an interactive audience with a repository of wonderful postulates, more than we could easily dissect in a single discussion. I conjecture with any. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if someone says a really good question and we don't get around to it, we may end up making a video on that topic later on. So,
that's right. And this is, and this and other videos that we've done topics on are, as far as I'm aware, wouldn't be if we were rational and aren't, as far as we're capable and willing and able, shall we say, going to be the last video on the aforementioned topic. More likely the first in the series for any particular topic, you know.
Yeah, pretty much. It's pretty much a given. Almost.
What's that, Matthew?
Shall we set some sort of points that we've made so far and kind of recap as to where we are? And
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. So I'd say
like we all, but that's a
we've
great quote.
conjectured right now about Locke's idea. We've acknowledged the relevancy. Before Locke's, we've acknowledged the relevancy of not trying to define in totality what a person is, but trying to find some subset of sufficient or necessary conditions that are reliable for personhood, if and when existent.
Yep.
Right. Then we've from there kind of gone on to say, okay, well, given that as the goal, who's taking a crack at it? Locke took this crack at it, and he's crack at it. Careful of that. I'm not saying he's a crack addict, but it could be misheard, right? But Locke made an attempt, right, to define it in terms of consciousness, insofar as that relates to memories, conscious memories, as he called them, and the continuity or persistence of those across time is an idea of personhood, which is important in that for Locke, it wouldn't necessarily depend on a body. You could think about the transference of personhood, things like that. And we found room for perhaps where we might find that questionable, right? But we have to be careful on that. A criticism of a definition on the boundaries of the definition, it's not enough to find a boundary condition and say, well, given that it didn't address this, that's a bad definition. Because for all we know, maybe he's right, and that's just not a person, and we're arguing a boundary condition that's not applicable. We would like to find an internal contradiction, a problem with the definition, not simply a claim that we're woke enough to claim that we understand a person better than him. Do you understand?
Yep. You know how you're sort of saying it, so making it so that, like, so AI possibly doesn't get the personhood things because it applies to humans or whatever. What happens if we actually get the technology to download our consciousness into a computer? It retains all the memories. That should be a personhood if we want to try and protect our thoughts and patterns of things, maybe.
That AIs can't or have a person in a sense.
I don't know. To be honest, I think we should suspend that kind of discussion until we have some semblance of a definition.
Well,
and the reason
I want to go into an AI one full depth, though.
But here's my point. Because I want you guys to pay attention to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I don't think a good method for approaching any of the definitions that we have discussed and are going to discuss a little more is to look at boundary conditions and say, well, this doesn't feel like personhood to me. And then say from there, what we want is to see if the definition itself has internal consistency. And I claim that I've given you a reason to suspect otherwise by looking at proposing two sets that are equivalent across time. We would like for an idea of identity, not just to be determining something's propagation through states of systems or its continuity across time, but but to distinguish it from other applicable entities of the same type. Right, the number 1 and 2 in the system.
We got to define it.
Go ahead. The numbers 1 and 2 in the system are distinguishable from each other, right?
Wait, guys, we solved it. Junius figured it out. Personhood, the quality or condition of being an individual person.
Damn it! We've just spent 50 minutes.
What were we thinking? Thanks.
What does that mean?
That's it. We got it.
Yes.
I'll see you guys.
So this is a great question, Lacey. Is being biological a prerequisite for personhood? So this is right. So here's what I think we should do. And I know it's tempting. These are tempting questions, but I don't think we're going to arrive at a good definition. And what's likely going to occur is as these videos propagate, we will take past inferences combined with future insights to eventually culminate to some streamlined insight, right? So I feel like so for now, we're just kind of getting a feel for the territory. And I feel like biological parameters, maybe that's not the right question to motivate before we even have a definition. It's not that that's not a substantive question. I claim that if we have a good enough definition, it may make clear whether that's a relevant question.
Yeah, it might be a good question for a little bit later. That's what I was trying. Like I was sort of asking the same thing about uploading one's consciousness to things.
Right,
yeah, but we shouldn't go about the question route. Yeah, you're right, Christopher. Because for us to answer it, it seems we have to have an inkling of what personhood is. Yeah, we're just gonna like keep messing around with all these questions and not get to something robust. So yeah, it's very true.
If anyone wants to join in the stream, by the way, I'm going to post the link in chat. You guys can join on in if you're comfortable, willing, and able, and whatever other semblance of sufficient or necessary conditions that I'm not aware of. So there are other takes on personhood, and I'd like to start to like lead in the direction of an excavation of those conjectures made by other philosophers. So there's a philosopher, Nagasena, in a work, Questions for King Melinda. And Nagasena thinks of personhood very different from Locke. He's very skeptical of, first of all, our ability to define things simply by pointing out particular things and defining them set-wise or group-wise in a particular way. He thinks that that's insufficient for defining anything fundamentally. And he may fundamentally have a point there if and when there are constraints on what discrete systems of logic can do, right? So there may be something to be said there, depending on the nature of the thing that we are discussing, of course. It may not always be true, but it may possibly be true. I don't know. But Nagasena, therefore, would shift the discussion away. But of course, herein lies the problem, is now here he comes talking with a discrete system of logic. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with him. But I think there is. Go ahead.
Maybe personhood is like Thomas Aquinas, something that only
in the higher science. Just don't question the line of the higher science. Right. But so Nagasena brought people's perspective to a question of, well, let's look at a mango. Suppose you bite into the mango, right? Is it now the same mango as before you had taken a bite out of it? Well, maybe not, right? The question might be, did this mango with a bite in it result from the prior mango prior to your having had bitten it?
Well, wouldn't that mango not be the same as it?
Well, here's what Nagasena is pointing out. He's saying, all right, and again, this is not what I think as much as what others have submitted. Okay, Nagasena is saying, what if a person is not defined as an equivalency of states, but that those states are all part of the same function? Okay, so it's kind of like a graph.
Yeah.
The values differ, but that doesn't separate them from being a part of the relation to which they belong. And so Nagasena is trying to say, okay, that mango is the same mango in the sense that the relation for the permutation of states is what connects them.
Now we're getting somewhere. This is a little more pretty. I like this.
So for Nagasena, you are the same person if you are the thing that resulted from your mother. That is a person.
Oh man.
And it doesn't require you to be the same.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't require, according to Nagasena, because he doesn't think you can fundamentally fully describe things, that you are able to axiomatize things rigorously in a particular order. He would say that, but of course you see the problem there. There's a bevy of potential for contradiction. But it may be.
Well, for example, we're going by that interpretation.
We're questioning. We're not saying whether it's like good or bad. I don't know.
Right. But if we're saying,
I'll bring it up for you guys to slaughter is what I'm doing, and then I'm going to take a shot at it.
Oh, okay. Because
all right, I've got one.
Based on that interpretation, because I've come from numerous families, I've been adopted. So if you were saying, are you the same if you're coming from your biological mother's womb? But what if I was put up adopted as an infant and grown and raised by 3 other different, parenthood, mothers, fathers, and maybe even older sisters? Let's say that. Am I the same as that biological distinction from the beginning?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It just sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but very hard to say.
I'm back.
Yeah, that was the creepiest smile. I thought you were
Yeah.
I thought you were just holding it like.
What was it like? I couldn't see. Oh, really?
Dude, you were just frozen there for like a solid, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 seconds. And I was like, wow, he's getting something out of this that I don't understand. That's hilarious.
That's fine. That's fine. It's part of it comes with the territory. So you guys go ahead and I'd like to hear what you guys think.
Well, I was thinking about it. I've just been a pain in the ass. But okay, I'm going on the I'm going on the evolution.
That he is, right.
I'm going on the assumption that evolution happened, right? Okay. Now, if we take that back far enough, Yeah, oh God,
gotta go
help
down
me.
a whole other rabbit
I'm going to find a friend for that. Anyway, but on that assumption, theoretically, there must have been a time when a human was born from someone who wasn't quite human or something, right?
Yeah.
There must have been a line somewhere, where I'm coming from, where we were people and not people, like humans, and then all of a sudden, like the step before humans. So the first person who was born human, in other words, they wouldn't have been born from a human mother theoretically because they're the first person.
Well, that's
So
the
were they not a person?
And there were
That was my pain in the ass question. Sorry.
that's the ship problem again, because it's just like
Yeah.
you just
You see, but this isn't actually in opposition to what Nagasena is saying. That's his point.
yeah.
He's saying that's why he's defining it as whether there is some chain that can connect them, not whether or not you're classifying them both in the same group.
So like Homo
Because
sapiens and Homo erectus kind of thing.
He's pointing out that just as with the mango, so too would you have a problem here, where you would have to say, well, this mango is not the same mango, right?
Lacey, yes, according to what I understand.
ATBI, lose all my memories, undergo development change. You could be if you resulted from that process for Nagasena. He's not required. But he's also not denying. But he's also not denying that there may exist a subset of sufficient or necessary conditions for personhood. Right? He's not denied that. He's just saying that it's not that simple. That alone is not sufficient. It's also how those things are put together.
Like when I was trying to visualize what makes a person before, I ended up with a pie graph in my head and like percentages of things, but I'm still ironing it out. I think
Critical Cripple disagrees with Nagasena. I'm not sure, and that's fine. I don't know.
It's very hard
to clarify.
To at least agree or disagree, as I have not read his ideals in a sense. Like I don't know him in a way that you are familiar with. If I'm being presumptuous.
Oh, Critical Cripple's taking it all the way. I don't think you're the same person yesterday as you were last year.
Was it me or was it a compliment or a slide?
But again, Critical Cripple, be careful. What you're saying may not actually be a legitimate criticism because you're speaking in a different dimension. You see, for him, he's observing that he's not denying that. So that's not in opposition to what he said. He's saying yes, but the process by which you are connected is sufficient. So what we would like to do is find a problem with his definition, not a contrived boundary condition outside of it that may not apply to it.
I'm gonna take a little stab at it. That I'm, tell me what you think about this.
Oh, he's disagreeing with the evolution.
Okay.
Oh, you disagree with evolution? We're gonna have to do a whole nother video on this one.
Yeah, we've got to get Critical on at some point.
I feel like we should have came in and actually, I don't know.
Oh, no, he doesn't disagree with evolution. I think we're misinterpreting something.
Oh, yeah, he was talking to Lacey's comments, not ours.
The problem...
Right. Can someone see any of that?
Oh.
So can we step in the same river twice?
Oh.
Nope.
He's saying there's no
Although,
point
that's the thing, I mean, it's still going to be the same, like...
All right, but Critical Cripple, you have to be careful here because if matter is quantized, what do you mean?
Yeah, that's the thing. You got to break it down. It's like, do you mean the river as in geographically, or do you mean the river as in the quantity of water?
Has a point though. She was asking a question. She wasn't stating. She could have meant that rhetorically. She's just asking. I agree. She's not like making a claim per se. She's just asking a question. But. So I hope what's clear is that this is a more difficult question than people might initially surmise, right? And it may be important as to what a person is because let's say that Duncan and I, if a thing that is a person even exists, if the person Christopher and Duncan have a Lacey is Larry. Okay, thank you for the
revealed
alternate accounts then okay I mean that's but if he and I have an agreement that I'm to pay him at a future time t, right, suddenly the relevancy of whether or not personhood persists across time and with some continuity is brought to bear is now who I pay depends on who Duncan is.
Okay, can I throw a little wrench in this whole thing? Isn't this
sure.
This whole theory kind of dependent on functional definitions of like mango in the first place?
Implicitly, right? But again, we're back to the question of whether or not the definition defines the thing, or if
Yeah,
that's an attempt to reference the thing.
I feel like we didn't make any progress. I mean, sorry to say this, but I feel like we didn't really.
Well, well, we did make progress. It's just
Define progress.
We did,
What was this philosopher's name? So I can actually take
Nagasena. Nagasena was if that's what you're asking about.
The last guy that we were referring to, yeah.
but I mean, I think that's hardly the question we're trying to. I mean, maybe I'm just interpreting this wrong, but this is hardly the question we're trying to crack at the fundamental level. We're trying to get to. I mean, yeah, things can change across time, and the definition can be that that thing is just as long as it started here and was at least that thing, it can keep going, whatever.
So here's the way to phrase it. Is the question, what are we looking at to stay the same? Is it the values in a relation or the relation itself? What makes a relation consistent?
I'm thinking not just the change, but also the definition of the thing, like the mango. It's resting on the definition of mango to make like you're resting on something, and I feel like we're trying to get there, not here. I don't know.
It could be. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
But Nagasena doesn't necessarily want to assume. You see, the problem is that he doesn't want to assume that we can necessarily just through arranging discrete symbols in a particular way easily define something. So it may be that he doesn't think that that's how we would.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't think we can, shall we say, define a mango in a way that captures the essence of a mango adequately.
I mean, honestly, a mango kind of both exists and doesn't exist at the same time. It's like it's only called a mango because we call it a mango. If life didn't exist, it wouldn't have those definitions that we've placed onto it, and the evolution thing wouldn't bother it. Like it could have been something before it was mango, and then it eventually evolved into something different from mango, without us sitting here putting those labels on it. It's just doing its thing.
I don't know. I don't know. So this I guess is a segue into a third perspective I've heard of. There are some philosophers argue a person as a primitive logical object that is irreducible. And what I mean by that is, so what we mean by that, is like how we take a point in geometry as something that we don't define any deeper. It is a point.
Oh.
It's a two-tuple. And so what I'm saying is he argues that a person, that we're struggling with this because it is a primitive logical object. Again, I'm not saying I agree with these definitions. I'm just throwing out perspectives proposed by some philosophers say that a person is a primitive logical object that can't be reduced further, but that can't easily be defined in such a way like a point, where there's this object in geometry that is a point, but you don't give a proof of a point. It's a definition.
So a person is a person. We're back to that.
Right. It's a problem.
Yeah.
Well, they're not
come back to that a lot.
They're not quite saying that it's not quite circular in that way. What they're saying, is that if it's a primitive logical object, we're not going to be able to axiotize it adequately. It's slightly different from what Nagasena is saying. They're saying that that our inability to find a substantive, robust definition may be actually a property of personhood.
Oh.
Well, I mean, we do harp on about individuality. They might have a point.
Meaning it may be a kind of structure where all these things are necessary for it. And so when we look at any one of these things, we see that it doesn't wholly define it, but that it's a sufficiently primitive logical object that that in whatever dimension of analysis it exists in, it's irreducible from that. Meaning if we take anything out of it, we now have lost the basis for that span of analysis. That's kind of what this idea of philosophy is conjecturing.
So
do I find it compelling? Not necessarily. No.
What about what critical?
Critical.
Then we have to start chipping.
Yeah, I think that.
No, I do not like that. We're gonna kill ourselves doing that.
Yeah.
No,
but
what he's trying to say is, let me give you an analogy, because I wouldn't have brought up the point if I didn't think it was worth mentioning. What this line of thinking is conjecturing, is kind of like this. If you don't have points, lines, and a metrized Cauchy or complete space, if you don't have these parameters together, it's not clear that you can construct a geometry.
Oh, I see.
And so all of these things make up primitive elements in the analysis of geometry. And so the thing that is a person may be in that field of analysis an irreducible primitive logical structure for that type of analysis to exist. That's what he's kind of saying. It's not obvious.
There is nothing further that you can establish, pretty much.
It's still a symbolic.
Going further from this point. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry?
Are you saying that pretty much this conversation is meaningless as it already is deduced to its final point? In a sense?
No.
Or can we continue to dissect and extrapolate what it actually means? Or are we already there?
I don't know, but I don't feel like Larry's proposal here is getting us any closer to what we're attempting to do. Yeah, Lacey is evidently Larry, and let's imagine all time exists at once. Okay, that seems contradictory. What do you mean all of it exists at once? You don't mean once in the sense of time. So you mean for a system that there's just a past and future and present, but there's also an elsewhere in time. So I don't know what time is or if it fundamentally exists, but whatever it is, assume it exists. And the entity in which our evolution occurs is our person. Again, is everyone else seeing that as like, I don't see how that gets us any closer.
The gray matter between our
Yeah,
souls.
I think that's a lot of different nebulous.
Like, I don't know. There might be something there. Maybe concretize it a little.
Yeah, I think what they're trying to say comes back to, well, this is what we're trying not to do is go within like theoretical points and try and figure out like, oh, the AI is or this or this.
Right. We need something of a tenable definition.
Yeah. So we're not going to ignore you, Larry, but we're just not going that route about this right now because it's
Otherwise, it would go down the hole.
Somebody else is going to ask a question. Somebody else is going to ask a question, and we're going to keep doing this game where we're asking these questions and like never getting anywhere, just killing ourselves.
Well,
We're 4 hours.
Like, we started, like we can't really hold what it means of a definition or word, personhood.
Right. Well, it's not that those things are necessarily boundaries, but they're important things to keep in mind, right?
Right.
Because right now, each of the initial videos on a topic is really meant to prime the audience and get them familiar with the topology, familiarize ourselves where in the forest, under which rocks and trees might we want to investigate. We're not really expecting an answer in any of these videos. And that's why we primarily focus on motivating questions, but we're not avoiding the potential for substantive answers. We are just trying to have a genuine dialogue.
And pique certain interests. And where they need to focus are on, where the focus needs to be on, in a sense.
Guys,
that may be true.
I drink quite the amount of water. I'm going to use the restroom really fast.
That's fine.
Fair enough.
And it may be true, but like I said, I think a necessary.
Oh, you froze on us again.
Oh, gone.
Oh no!
And then there were two.
Then there was yes.
Yeah.
Well,
He'll come back.
What was that last comment?
Person could only be a pet.
Well, I don't think there will be a strict definition by the end of this discourse.
Well, it's a pretty hard thing to achieve. Like,
Exactly.
what we're trying to do is trying to figure out where we should look for the right definition, if even such a thing as the right definition even exists. Because, as we kind of pointed out before, the whole nature of the thing tends to expand somewhat. What we consider to be human nowadays would have been quite different to 2,000 years ago. And the things that we had that would have said, oh yeah, we can put these in place, and if it does this, then it's a human. Those have now changed because we've now made devices that act more human.
Who is this?
You know what I
This
mean?
person actually, if this person is thinking the way that I intend to interpret what they've said, this person has actually linked our current discussion with my past insights or conjectures pertaining to autonomy.
He's a mate of mine, Simon. I
Yeah,
think
well
I might
done,
have told you about him
Simon.
in
I
the
think
private chat.
if that's what he's done, then that's actually what I intended in the future, is for us to link these concepts across time to concretize them. That's tenable and it's possible. But notice that personhood, therefore, may not be one object, but an object divided by autonomy. Meaning autonomy may not be central to personhood.
Yeah.
And so whoever Simon is, yeah. If you okay, so I'm assuming he did. If you've linked that from
Yep.
watching the past episode of Meaning, that is what I intended. Because now if you link the internal and external factor, the hope is that people would realize that the personhood is likely not going to be easily fit into just autonomy or a lack thereof. It's probably going to be a multivariable definition.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to be very abstract. It seems maybe
Yep.
it will be complex, but it will be, if and when we eventually concretize sufficiently to have a tenable definition, it should be, if possible, as Duncan has conceded, I think, potentially substantive and less nebulous.
Yep.
So I think having it motivated, an interesting set of questions. We could probably end the podcast here, transition to I'll drop the link in the description and just go to the after party. And if anyone wants to then discuss, in the after party, we can conclude with this first dive into the question. What do you guys say?
I agree.
Yeah.
Nice to have you guys on. And Matthew, nice seeing
anyone
you.
from the chat would like to come into the after party?
Yeah, I'll drop the link for you guys.
Yeah. Good discussion, everybody. Thank you, everyone who joined in and asked a few questions and got us going. We really
All right. I'm gonna end the
speaking even
broadcast.
harder.